The paper plates were still fluttering on the backyard table when the words hit me like a slap I never saw coming. The sun was warm, the breeze was gentle, and yet something inside me cracked so sharply it felt like the whole world went quiet. I remember gripping the edge of the chair just to steady myself, fighting the sting rising behind my eyes as the people around us tried to pretend they hadn't heard anything at all. If you've ever had a moment where the ground shifts under your feet because of someone you thought you could trust, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. These stories happen more often than we admit. I didn't know it yet, but that single moment was the first thread in a web I never imagined I was already trapped in. Let me show you how it all began. I can still feel the sting of that afternoon settling into my chest. The way the air shifted around me at my grandson's birthday party. One moment I was standing by the grill, arranging the last of the cupcakes, and the next I was staring at my daughter-in-law as she brushed past me with that tight smile she saves for moments when she wants to make sure everyone hears her. I remember the weight of her words, not quoted, but etched into me, suggesting I was becoming a burden, that maybe it was time for me to pull back and stop involving myself in things that weren't mine. It hit with the kind of force that makes your ears ring. For a second, the whole backyard went quiet. I could feel eyes on me, neighbors, friends, acquaintances, people who didn't know the half of what had been happening behind closed doors. They only saw an older woman standing there, swallowing her hurt as if it were just another slice of cake she didn't want. But inside, something settled, not broken, not defeated, settled. I had been preparing for this exact moment for months. Every strange detail I'd noticed, every instinct I'd pushed aside, every quiet plan I'd made. It all came together in a single breath. I knew then that this wasn't just a birthday party. It was the beginning of the truth finally coming to light. And maybe it's time I explain who I am and why this moment mattered so much. I'm Eleanor Carter, and despite what some people may assume when they look at me, I'm not fragile, nor am I someone who drifts through life without paying attention. I'm 68, a widow for almost a decade now, and I've spent more than 35 years working as an accountant. Numbers and patterns were my world, and they trained me to notice things. Tiny shifts, inconsistencies, the kinds of details most people overlook without a second thought. After my husband passed, I worked hard to keep my independence. I built a life that felt steady, centered, and grounded. And at the heart of that life has always been my son, Michael, and my grandson, Evan. They're the reason I stayed patient when small things with Lana didn't sit right. I told myself families go through seasons. I reminded myself that peace sometimes comes from letting little things go. But I also knew myself. I wasn't naive, and I wasn't easily fooled. I simply chose to believe in the good, at least until the evidence asked me not to. What happened at that birthday party mattered because it was the moment I stopped giving the benefit of the doubt. It was the moment every quiet warning finally made sense. And those warnings started small, almost invisible, until they weren't. I wish I could say the unease started with something obvious, but it didn't. It crept in slowly, the way a faint draft slips under a closed door. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, but little moments began piling up, each one nudging me toward a truth I didn't want to face. I remember the first time Lana mentioned a number from my savings account, something I had never shared with her. She said it casually, as if it were common knowledge, and I felt a small chill settle into my spine. Then came her insistence that Michael see a different doctor, someone she claimed was more modern. It struck me as odd because his longtime physician had always been thorough and steady. A week later, she handed Michael a bottle of heart supplements she said were essential. I watched him take them, uneasy with how invested she seemed in directing his health. And then there were the conversations she steered toward wills and long-term planning, spoken with a strange excitement that made my stomach tighten. But the moment everything shifted was the afternoon I walked into Michael's. home office and found Lana crouched beside his filing cabinet. She looked startled, but not embarrassed. More irritated that I had interrupted her, she brushed it off with a thin explanation. Yet I could feel the air change around us, as if I had stepped into something I wasn't meant to see. That was the moment my curiosity hardened into suspicion. The pattern was no longer subtle. It was deliberate, and I knew I couldn't sit quietly anymore. It was time for answers, and I was finally ready to start looking. I had no idea then just how far those early signs would eventually push me toward the truth forward. The day I found Lana crouched by that filing cabinet was the day I realized I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Something inside me tightened, a quiet voice saying this wasn't forgetfulness or coincidence. It was intention. And once that thought formed, I knew I had to act on it. The first person I reached out to was my attorney, someone I've trusted for more than 20 years. I told him I needed to confirm something that sounded almost absurd, even as I said it. When he called back, his tone told me everything before his words did. Someone had been asking questions about my will, specific questions, using details only a family member would know. And no, those inquiries had not come from anyone authorized. Hearing that felt like the floor shifting beneath me. Still, I needed more than one piece of proof. So I drove to my bank, walking in with a steady face, even though my heart was pounding. A friend I've known there since my early career pulled up my recent activity. She showed me that someone had been checking on my accounts, asking whether certain transfers were possible. Again, the inquiries were presented as if they came from my daughter-in-law. That was the moment suspicion turned into clarity. This wasn't imagination. Someone was moving around me, studying my life, preparing for something I didn't yet understand. I decided I needed professional help. That's when I hired Sandra Briggs, a private investigator with a reputation for patience and persistence. I sat across from her in her small office and laid everything out. My fears, my observations, the pieces that didn't fit no matter how I tried to arrange them. Then came the waiting. Weeks of forcing myself to smile at family dinners, pretending not to flinch when Lana hovered too close, acting as though life was unchanged, while every instinct inside me screamed. Otherwise, it was exhausting, holding it all in. But the determination to protect my family kept me steady, and when Sandra finally called, I knew the truth, whatever it was about to surface. I walked into Sandra Briggs's office that morning with a knot in my stomach. But nothing could have prepared me for what she had laid out on her desk. There were folders stacked in careful rows, each one marked with dates, addresses, and names I didn't recognize. When she invited me to sit, I felt as if I were stepping into a version of my life I hadn't known existed. She opened the first folder, and that was the moment my world began to tilt. Lana's name wasn't Lana at all. It was one of several identities she had cycled through over the last 15 years. Each new name came with a new marriage, a new household, and, in several cases, an elderly family member whose death was recorded as unfortunate but convenient. Sandra had traced the timelines, and the pattern was undeniable. Every relationship ended with assets transferred, insurance payouts completed, and a graceful exit that left no one asking the right questions. By the time she opened the second folder, my hands were trembling. She showed me records of background searches made on my family months before. My son ever met her, screenshots of social media pages she had bookmarked, notes she had kept on my schedule, my routines, my involvement with Michael and Evan. It was all deliberate. She had studied us, selected us, and then came the part that nearly took the breath from my lungs. Sandra revealed a financial assessment estimating my net worth. I had always lived modestly, but decades of careful saving, property appreciation, and my late husband's pension had accumulated into far more than I ever talked about. Lana had known she had targeted us because I fit the profile she had perfected. Shock gave way to a cold, heavy horror. I felt grief for my son, for the trust he had placed in someone who had never loved him. I felt sorrow for myself, realizing I was not dealing with a difficult daughter-in-law but someone far more dangerous. When I finally stood to leave, one truth settled deeper than anything else: I was in real danger. And from that moment on, I would have to pretend I knew nothing at all. Those next steps would demand a kind of patience and composure I wasn't sure I possessed. But I knew I had no choice if I wanted to keep my family. The hardest part wasn't learning the truth about Lana. The hardest part was waking up the next morning, knowing I still had to sit across from her at Sunday dinner and smile as if nothing had changed. I remember standing in Michael's kitchen, my hands shaking slightly as I arranged the silverware, watching her move around the room with that effortless sweetness she put on. Whenever others were watching, I kept thinking, she knows nothing. She cannot know that I know. That thought became my shield. But the weight of pretending pressed on me every single day. I forced myself to make polite conversation, to thank her for small favors, to accept the meals she brought over. Every gesture felt like a test of my composure. And every time she asked about my health or encouraged Michael to take those supplements, I felt a cold fear settle deeper into my bones. Quietly, I began protecting myself. I met with a different law firm to revise my will, keeping everything locked behind new security measures. I moved a portion of my assets into accounts she would never find. I had the supplements analyzed by a pharmacist I trusted. I checked the background of that new doctor she had insisted on, and the inconsistencies I found only sharpened my vigilance. The months stretched on, each day a balancing act between fear and strategy. Lana grew bolder in her watchfulness, and I grew more certain that she was waiting for something. I could feel a shift coming, the way the air changes before a storm. I just didn't know how close it truly was, until the detective called. I was standing at my kitchen counter when the phone rang, and for a moment I almost didn't answer it. I had been living in a constant state of caution for so long that any unexpected sound made my heart jump. But something in me knew I needed to pick up. The voice on the other end introduced himself as a detective from another state. And the moment I heard his name, a slow, cold dread slid through me. He said he was reopening a series of older cases involving women who had used the same aliases Sandra had uncovered. I remember gripping the edge of the counter, feeling the room tilt as he explained that Lana's past wasn't just complicated. It was violent. He spoke carefully, but the weight of his words was unmistakable. Elderly partners, sudden medical incidents, quiet settlements, patterns that stretched across years, tied neatly together once someone finally looked closely. Listening to him felt like watching the floor drop away beneath me. Every fear I had tried to keep contained crashed over me at once. He didn't tell me what to do directly, but the message behind his tone was clear. Be careful. Protect yourself. And do not let her know what you know. When the call ended, I stood frozen, staring at my own reflection in the darkened window. For months, I had been pretending, managing my fear, telling myself that awareness alone could keep me safe. But hearing the detective confirm what Sandra had suspected made everything sharper, more immediate. This wasn't just about finances or manipulation anymore. It was about survival. I realized then that the danger was no longer distant. It was inside my family, woven into our daily routines. And something in me shifted. I knew I couldn't keep pretending forever. A confrontation was coming, whether I wanted it or not. After the detective's call, I tried to step back into my routines, but nothing felt familiar anymore. Every sound in the house seemed sharper, every shadow heavier. And Lana, she wasn't the same either. There was a new alertness in her eyes, as if she could sense the shift in me. Even though I fought to keep every expression calm, she watched me more closely than she ever had, studying my movements the way someone studies a locked door they're trying to open. The moment that nearly gave me away happened in the kitchen. I was wiping down the counter when she walked in behind me. Quiet, too quiet. and asked a question about my health, one she had asked before. But this time, her tone carried something probing underneath. I felt my breath hitch for a split second. I wondered if she could hear my heart pounding. I kept my voice steady, but I saw her eyes narrow, just slightly, as if she were testing the edges of my composure. All afternoon, she hovered near me, offering help I didn't need, lingering in doorways, appearing suddenly whenever I moved from one room to another. It felt like being circled, and each time our eyes met, I felt the danger tightening around us both. A thin wire pulled just a little too far. Inside, fear and resolve clashed with every step I took. I needed to protect Michael and Evan. I needed to stay ahead of her long enough for the truth to settle into the right hands. By nightfall, I knew the pretending was seconds away from collapsing. Whatever Lana suspected, whatever she was preparing for, it was already in motion, and something told me the breaking point was coming sooner than I imagined. I remember standing over the stove that evening, stirring a pot I could barely focus on. My hands moved out of habit, but my mind was fixed on the officers waiting in unmarked cars just down the street. They were close enough to intervene, but far enough that Michael and Evan wouldn't sense something was wrong. I kept telling myself I just needed to get through dinner, that this would be the moment everything finally came to light. But I didn't expect Lana to arrive early. She walked in with a brightness that felt hollow, almost sharp, as if she were wearing a smile like armor. The moment I saw her eyes, I felt my stomach sink. There was a stillness in her expression, a calculated calm that told me she had made a decision long before stepping through that door. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but dread pooled in my chest as she moved through the room with quiet certainty. Then I noticed the way she glanced toward the counter, toward the glasses I had set out earlier. A terrible realization hit me all at once. Whatever she had planned, it wasn't something she intended to do later. It was something she had already done. I felt my pulse pound in my ears as I stepped between her and Michael, trying not to let panic show. She watched me with a knowing look, as if she could see the truth rising behind my eyes. Before I could react, one of the officers rushed through the door. The sudden movement shattered whatever mask Lana had been holding in place. She lunged, not at me, but toward the counter. And in that instant, chaos erupted. I grabbed Evan and pulled him close as Michael stumbled back, startled by the commotion. The officers reached her before she could touch anything, but the struggle was fierce, desperate, terrifying. And then, just as quickly as it began, it ended. Lana collapsed under the weight of it all. Her plans, her lies, her unraveling control. I stood there shaking, holding my grandson, realizing how close we had come to losing everything. And as the officers led her away and the house fell into stunned silence, all I could feel was the fragile relief of being alive, knowing the long road of healing was only beginning. In the quiet after that night, I remember feeling as if the walls themselves were exhaling. The house finally felt still again. Though my hands shook for days, Michael recovered slowly, trying to make sense of what had almost happened. And I stayed close, grateful every time I saw him sitting safely at the kitchen table, or heard Evan's easy laughter drifting down the hall. Investigators moved quickly, pulling together everything the detective and the private investigator had already uncovered. For the first time in months, the truth wasn't mine alone to carry. It lived out in the open, documented, acknowledged, believed. There was relief in that, but there was grief too. I had to face how close we came to losing everything, and how long I had lived under a shadow without anyone knowing. Healing wasn't sudden. It came in small pieces, quiet mornings with coffee, evenings when my heartbeat finally settled, moments when I caught myself breathing a little easier. My family became gentler with one another. Conversations felt more honest. Doors stayed open. Light filled the spaces where fear used to sit. And slowly, I began to feel myself return. knowing I had one last thing to say before finally closing this chapter. There are days now when I sit on my porch and feel a kind of quiet I once thought I'd never know again. After everything that happened, I carry a deeper gratitude for the simple moments. A warm morning light, the sound of Evan running through the yard, the steady peace in Michael's voice. I survived a season that nearly broke me, and in that survival, I found a clearer sense of what matters: truth, family, and the courage to listen to your own instincts even when no one else understands. I don't pretend the journey was easy. Healing rarely is, but I'm still here, stronger in ways I never expected. And I hope my story reminds someone out there that they're not alone in their fear or their fight. If any part of this touched you, I'd be grateful to hear your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments below.